The once proud sword soul opened its eyes to find itself trapped in the flabby, weak body of Prince Adrien. This body was a disaster of gluttony and neglect, a far cry from the heroes the sword had served for centuries. Determined to survive, the prince sat in a meditative trance to gather the world's sparse mana into his chest. The process was agonizing as the unrefined mana burned through his clogged pathways like liquid fire. He collapsed to the floor after hours of effort, realizing the sheer physical resistance of his own flesh. A trembling maid entered the room offering a restorative tea that surprisingly hummed with a trace of energy. Adrien drained the cup in a single gulp, feeling the medicinal mana stabilize the chaotic swirl in his heart. With the extra boost, he made one final push to condense the energy into a permanent core. A sharp chime echoed in his mind as a status window announced the successful creation of a mana heart. He realized the window was identical to the one he used to communicate with his masters in his previous life. The system warned that most of his original authorities were sealed due to the body's low level. However, the judgment authority flickered to life, allowing him to perceive the hidden potential of those around him. His progress was interrupted by the arrival of his uncle Vale, who looked at the prince with unmasked disappointment. Vale announced that he would personally oversee the prince's education, promising a hellish training regime. Instead of cowering, Adrien proposed a bet that he would earn his uncle's acknowledgement within 6 months. Vale laughed at the fat prince's audacity but agreed to the terms, seeing it as mere entertainment. The training began immediately at the arena, where the prince was forced to swing a heavy wooden sword until his hands bled. His uncle mocked his use of a mana heart, calling it a crude technique used only by low-level mercenaries. Vale demonstrated the modern mana chain technique, creating a rotating ring of energy that easily shattered training dummies. Adrien realized that the world had moved on to efficiency over raw, soulful power during his long slumber. He refused to abandon the mana heart, believing that the true dragon-slaying potential was being ignored. Every day was a cycle of bone-crushing exercise and manual mana refinement to burn away his excess body fat. His transformation was slow but steady, his flabby frame gradually hardening into solid muscle. News of the prince's madness spread through the court as nobles mocked his sudden interest in martial arts. Adrien ignored the gossip, his focus entirely on the status window that tracked his rising physical stats. During a heavy storm, he reached a state of hyper-focus, swinging his blade until the wood itself began to hum. The system announced the acquisition of a new trait, acknowledging his extreme concentration under duress. He collapsed in the mud, his body finally reaching its limit after weeks of non-stop exertion. He woke up to find Adelia tending his wounds, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and admiration. Using his judgment skill, he saw a shocking array of S-rank talents hidden behind her humble maid's exterior. He realized that this maid was a descendant of the legendary Byron family, a potential weapon he could not ignore. To build his own power base, he would need more than just his own strength. He needed loyal subjects. His half-brother, the third Prince Gillian, visited the arena to laugh at his pitiful efforts. Adrien simply stared through him, seeing the mediocrity hidden behind Gillian's polished armor. He issued a challenge to anyone in the capital who wished to duel him, turning the mockery into an opportunity. Letters of challenge flooded in from minor nobles looking for a legal way to beat the Pig Prince. He chose the first opponent, a vengeful young noble named Taylor, who held a deep grudge against the old Adrien. The duel was set to take place at the palace gates, drawing a massive crowd of curious onlookers. Adrien stepped onto the field, his movements no longer clumsy but sharp and economical. As the first blow was struck, the crowd gasped to see the useless prince perfectly parry a seasoned knight's attack. The silence in the courtyard grew heavy as the wooden training sword in Adrien's hand remained perfectly steady. Uncle Vale narrowed his eyes, unable to comprehend how the nephew he once pitied had suddenly acquired the footwork of a master. Adrien didn't offer an explanation, instead focusing his breathing to circulate the tiny spark of mana within his chest. Vale jumped down from the observation deck, his heavy boots cracking the stone tiles upon impact. He demanded that Adrien repeat the movement 1,000 times until his muscles screamed in protest. Hours passed as the sun dipped lower, and Adrien's shirt clung to his back with sweat. From the shadows of the pillars, the silver-haired knight Arwen watched the prince with a growing sense of unease. She remembered the prince as a man who couldn't climb a flight of stairs without losing his breath. Adrien felt his mana heart flicker, the unrefined energy burning his underdeveloped meridians like molten lead. He whispered the first verse of the martial spirit hymn, a forbidden chant from his previous life. Suddenly, the weight of his body seemed to vanish as the mana stabilized and reinforced his bones. Vale swung a heavy practice axe at Adrien's head to test his reflexes one last time. With a fluid motion that defied his bulk, Adrien stepped into the attack's blind spot. The wooden sword tapped lightly against Vale's throat, signaling a hypothetical death blow. The entire training field fell into a deathly silence as the guards dropped their spears in shock. Vale lowered his axe and let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed off the castle walls. He acknowledged that Adrien was no longer the rejected pig but a warrior in the making. Adrien knew he needed more than just one instructor if he wanted to survive the coming coup. Later that night, he summoned Arwen to his private study, surprising her with his formal invitation. Arwen questioned why she should pledge her loyalty to a prince who was destined for exile. Adrien stood up and demonstrated a single high-level sword technique that had been lost for 3 centuries. The knight's eyes widened as she recognized the legendary falling star style. She knelt before him, offering her sword and her life to the prince's secret cause. Next, Adrien approached Adelia, a young maid who had been secretly practicing with a kitchen knife in the gardens. Adelia dropped her knife, terrified that she would be punished for her forbidden hobby. Instead of scolding her, Adrien offered to teach her how to properly channel mana into a blade. He saw in her the same raw talent for assassination that his shadow guards had in his previous life. Over the next few weeks, the trio trained in secret beneath the castle, far from the prying eyes of the king. Adrien pushed them beyond their limits, forcing them to master the martial spirit hymns. He began to rewrite the fundamental laws of their martial arts, replacing inefficient movements with lethal precision. As Adrien's body leaned out, his old clothes no longer fit his expanding shoulders. The other princes mocked him during a formal banquet, unaware of the predator hiding beneath his skin. Adrien ignored their taunts, his mind already calculating the distance to the nearest exit. News arrived from the north that the orc tribes were gathering in unprecedented numbers. The king decided to send Adrien to the Winter Castle as a diplomat, which was essentially a death sentence. Adrien accepted the mission without hesitation, seeing it as the perfect opportunity to leave the capital's nest of vipers. He spent the final night preparing a set of specialized gear for Arwen and Adelia. He missed the feel of a real sword, but he knew the Winter Castle held the key to finding a worthy weapon. As the carriages were packed, the people of the capital watched the disgrace leave with mixed feelings. A dark figure watched from the highest spire, clutching a pendant that pulsed with a foul, ancient energy. The figure whispered a name that Adrien hadn't heard since his previous life's final battle. As the wheels of the carriage hit the frozen mud, Adrien felt a sudden, sharp pain in his mana heart. Outside, the horses began to neigh in terror as the temperature dropped 30 degrees in a matter of seconds. Adrien realized too late that the path to the north was already being haunted by something far worse than orcs. In the middle of the road stood a tall, translucent warrior holding a blade of solid ice. The translucent warrior raised the ice blade as the air temperature plummeted toward absolute zero. Adrien didn't flinch, sensing the familiar resonance of a guardian spirit testing his worthiness. With a sudden burst of red mana, the prince shattered the illusionary phantom with a single horizontal strike. The path to the Winter Castle was finally clear, revealing the jagged black spires of the northern fortress. Upon entering the courtyard, Adrien was greeted not by servants but by the biting wind and the scent of cold steel. Deep within the mountain's roots, the master smith waited in a forge heated by the planet's core. Adrien demanded the blade that had been prophesied to drink the blood of 10,000 orcs. The smith handed over Twilight, a blade forged from star metal and dragon bone. As Adrien gripped the hilt, the sword let out a low hum that shook the very foundations of the castle. Suddenly, the alarm bells of the fortress rang out, signaling the arrival of the green tide. Thousands of orc warriors emerged from the frozen woods, their war cries echoing like thunder. The orc warchief laughed, seeing only a handful of humans standing upon the battlements. Adrien stepped onto the edge of the wall, his new blade resting casually on his shoulder. Behind him, Arwen and Adelia prepared their weapons, ready to follow their prince into hell. Without a word, Adrien leaped from the 50-foot wall, descending like a falling star. The impact of his landing sent a shockwave that liquefied the ground and vaporized the nearest orcs. In the silence that followed the crash, Adrien began to hum a low, haunting melody. This was the Hymn of Vengeance, a forbidden song that amplified mana through pure focused rage. The first orc to charge lost his head before he could even register Adrien's movement. Every step Adrien took followed the rhythm of the hymn, turning the battlefield into a macabre dance floor. The warchief roared in frustration and threw his massive axes at the prince. Adrien swatted the projectiles away with the flat of his blade as if they were mere flies. He closed the distance in an instant, his boots leaving scorching marks on the frozen earth. The warchief swung his fists, but Adrien's red aura acted like a physical shield. "You're nothing but a footnote in my history," Adrien whispered as he prepared the final verse. The Twilight sword erupted in a pillar of black and red flame that reached the clouds. With a vertical cleave, he split the warchief and the very earth beneath him in two. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining orcs turned and fled into the dark woods. Adrien stood alone in the center of the carnage, his breathing perfectly steady. Arwen and Adelia ran toward him, their faces filled with awe at the absolute victory. Adrien turned to them and gave a small, rare smile, acknowledging their loyalty. He declared that the Winter Castle would no longer be a place of exile but the heart of a new empire. The sword soul within him felt a sense of peace it hadn't known in centuries. There were still enemies in the capital, but Adrien was no longer the rejected pig they once mocked. He had reclaimed his power, his dignity, and a future that belonged only to him. Adelia brought him a hot meal, a simple gesture that reminded him of the life he was now protecting. The people of the north began to emerge from hiding, hailing their new savior with tears of joy. The snow continued to fall, but this time it felt like a blanket of protection rather than a cold prison. Adrien closed his eyes, listening to the harmonious resonance of his mana heart beating in perfect sync with the world. The legend of the Sword Prince had only just begun, and the world was finally ready to hear his song.